Pan pizza, a perfect beginner's introduction to pizza. You don't need a pizza steel or a peel, and there won't be any hand tossing involved. All you need is an oven, a cake pan, and a little bit of time. So let's start with the dough. Here I have a partially pre-baked crust that I picked up from my local grocery store, and step one is going to be to throw it in the garbage because that is trash. We're going to be making our dough from scratch. It's easy, it's much cheaper. Seriously, who is paying $6 for these pre-baked crusts? And most importantly, it will be demonstrably more flavorful than any pre-made dough you've ever had. So, into this mixing bowl goes 1 cup, about 236 milliliters of warm water, 1 teaspoon or 3 grams of active dry yeast, and 1 teaspoon or 4 grams of white sugar. Give that a mix, and if you're feeling particularly brave, you can go ahead and add the flour, but I prefer to wait a few minutes just to make sure that my yeast is still alive. Plus, I get this cool time-lapse shot out of it. A few minutes later, and we can see our yeast are alive and blooming, so now we will add the dry ingredients. 1 teaspoon, about 6 grams of kosher salt, and to start with, 1 cup or 125 grams of double zero bread flour. All purpose flour will work here, but the added protein of the bread flour will help to strengthen the gluten network in our dough, giving us a better chew and slightly better flavor. To add some complexity to our dough, I'll also add a spoonful of cornmeal, and because I have it here, a spoonful of whole wheat flour. The additional grains will add some nice depth of flavor to our dough, but honestly, they're both optional. I wouldn't recommend buying a whole bag of either just for this recipe. However you choose to compose your dough, we'll now mix this up, adding additional flour as needed until the dough just starts to come together into one cohesive mass. The key to any good pizza dough is to err on the side of it being too wet. The wetter the dough, the better rise we'll get later on when we bake. Now, we also want to make sure we mix the dough enough to adequately develop the gluten network. In practice, it's virtually impossible to overmix dough by hand, so again, err on the side of overmixing here. Our dough has finally come together into one coherent mass, but it's still quite sticky. That's exactly where we want it. From here, we have two options. Rise it on the counter for a few hours, or stick it in the fridge and let it rise slowly over a few days. The counter rise is obviously quicker, but if you go with the slow rise in the fridge, you'll be rewarded with significantly deeper, more complex flavors, so choose accordingly. Me, I'm going to throw this in the fridge and forget about it until 6 days later. After almost a week in the fridge, our dough has emerged with a boozy, fermented, almost sourdough-like smell. That's thanks to the long fermentation time. That's going to translate into a supremely flavorful pizza that you didn't think was possible at home. However long you decide to let your dough ferment, it'll need to proof for at least an hour or two. For that, I have an 8x8 parchment lined cake or brownie pan. I recommend using aluminum over, say, ceramic, as it's more thermally conductive and it will result in better browning in the oven. I'm going to generously grease the pan with olive oil. We're using a super high hydration dough here, so the combination of parchment and oil will ensure the pizza doesn't stick. Additionally, the oil will help us develop a nice golden brown crust. I've got my dough here straight out of the fridge, and I'll quickly give it a little gravity stretch just to help distribute the dough a little more evenly in the pan. The goal here is to get the dough stretched out into the corners as much as possible. This looks good enough. Now we'll cover up with plastic and let proof on the counter for 1 to 2 hours or until roughly doubled in size. While our dough rises, we can contemplate our pizza sauce. Go with whatever canned, whole, or crushed tomatoes you like. I prefer using San Marzanos, the real deal imported straight from Italy. I'm lifting the fruit up and out of the canned tomato juice they're swimming in, as the juice tends to be from lower quality tomatoes. I'm just putting these into a high sided container, And then I'll blend this with my immersion blender, get that as smooth as you want. Then to season, we'll add a pinch of sugar, maybe 1.5 to 2 teaspoons or a gram each of dried basil and oregano, a small glug of olive oil, and a pinch of kosher salt. Set that aside until ready to use. Now let's talk about our cheese. Most of the mozzarella sold in US grocery stores is made from low-fat skim milk. Now, if that's all you can find, it will work, but ideally you'll want to use mozzarella made from whole milk. For me, that means I'll be using this Galbani string cheese. It might sound weird, but consider that string cheese is just mozzarella in a different form. Plus, it's made using whole milk, which is what we're after here. For one pizza, you'll want somewhere around 100 grams of cheese. That's roughly 5 of these strings. I'll slice each one in half and then cut into little rounds. I would avoid using any pre-shredded cheese here, as those usually have some kind of anti-clumping agents, like cornstarch in them, which would prevent the cheese from melting evenly in the oven. Grate the cheese yourself from a block, or use string cheese for best results. I've also got some aged pecorino I'll be grating under the mozz layer. Feel free to use Parmesan here instead. Our dough has been proofing for almost 2 hours now, and as you can see, it's quite puffy. It's also stuck to the plastic wrap. Just need to gently peel it off so as not to deflate the dough. I'll give it one final stretch, pulling from the center outward, just to make sure the dough isn't too thick in the middle. Now we'll go in with our sauce. I'll spread a thin layer from edge to edge. I like my pizza pretty saucy, but if you put too much on, it can waterlog the pizza and make the rest of the toppings soggy. So try to use at least some discretion here. That looks good. Now I'll grate on some pecorino cheese, putting it under the mozzarella layer to prevent it from burning. If you're using Parmesan, you can get away with using a little more. Pecorino is comparatively saltier, so again, I'm showing some discretion here. Lastly, we'll scatter on our sliced mozzarella, again going edge to edge so we can get some nice crispy brown cheesy bits where it's contacting the pan. You can, of course, use whatever other toppings you'd like. This is just the version for pickier eaters, such as myself. I've had my oven preheating on the highest setting, which for me is 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure you have a rack set at the lowest point. This step is crucial to get a dark, crispy, golden crust, as the main heating element in most ovens is typically located at the bottom. Once it's good and hot, slide the pizza in and cue the contractually obligated time-lapse shot. You'll want to check on the pizza after about 12 minutes. At this point, we're just waiting for the cheese to get as brown as we want before pulling it. That looks good to me. Total bake time was right around 15 minutes. I'll remove from the oven, let it rest for just a minute or two to help it solidify, and then carefully remove it from the pan and set on a wire rack. This will help wick steam away from the bottom and ensure the crispy crust we worked so hard for is maintained. Let the pizza cool for 5 to 10 minutes before slicing, and we are finally ready to enjoy. I've always loved the bright freshness you get from using an uncooked pizza sauce, and the dough is incredibly light and chewy and has a distinct boozy fermented flavor from the long slow rise. Plus, the flavor is deeper and more complex than what you're expecting thanks to the cornmeal and the whole wheat flour. Also, check out the color we were able to achieve on this pizza, thanks in part to the oil and the high baking temperature. That's basically one step below what you would get from a dedicated pizza oven for a fraction of the cost. But don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can continue to grow. Until next time.